We'll sing another song. Actually, I know that was just two songs, but before we have the Lord's Supper together, Giannis will come up, so we'll sing again. If you really wanted to sing, well, we will. Thanks, Giannis, for being here. Kaiva was supposed to be here as well, but, Christians, like the early Christians, had some struggles on Sunday morning, so it's just Giannis today, but I appreciate you coming alone, and hope Kaiva is surviving. So anyway, once again, welcome here, whether you're here in the flesh, in the body, or you're joining us from a distance. I appreciate that you're doing this, that you're here, especially, it's Easter. It's a good time to get out. This is when even, sort of nominal Christians might actually move their behinds a little bit and get to a church service, so I appreciate that you're here. We will have the Lord's Supper at the end of the service, and so I say that for you guys who are at home. If you want to get some bread and some kind of beverage ready, if you don't have wine ready, then, make some fruit tea or whatever. But we want to include you in that, even if you're at a distance, and I'll talk about that at the end. But anyway, if you guys need to, order from Remy a quick delivery of bread or something, then you can do that. But we are looking at Luke chapter 24, Luke's version of the resurrection, and we're kind of coming to the end of the story, and today we're going to kind of look at the finale of the Gospel of Luke and the three scenes that he paints there. We're not actually done with Luke's series. We've tried to keep moving pretty quickly in order to, have Luke chapter 24 today, but that meant we've left some things out that we're going to pick up. So we're probably, until the end of May, we're going to keep having sermons from the Gospel of Luke, especially in coming weeks, sort of looking at Jesus' teaching, particularly as it might apply to us as his followers at this kind of time period between the cross and then the end of the age. Well, we are looking at Luke's resurrection story, and like I said, he's going to paint three scenes. They all happen on Sunday, on that resurrection day. And in these three scenes, he's going to have a cast of characters. And this is actually going to be very significant for what Luke wants to communicate, what he wants to emphasize, and what he wants us to think about in the way that he tells the story of that first Easter Sunday. And in the first scene, the prominent characters are these women, a number of women. He mentioned them at the end of chapter 23, a couple of Marys, and there's, I guess, at least two Marys, maybe a third Mary was in this band of women who have been following him. And they observed the crucifixion. If you remember in reading the story, they prepared spices, and then they're going to come on Sunday morning, hopefully to kind of properly wrap up the body of Jesus there. But they are there. They've been following the story. They've been following Jesus actually the whole time. And there's significance to that. And Luke wants to emphasize all sorts of different kinds of people. The Gospel of Luke is the gospel or the good news for the world, for all nations and all kinds of people, especially marginalized people. And in many societies, certainly in society 2,000 years ago, women were more marginalized. For instance, their witness was not necessarily credible in a court of law. If all you had was female witnesses, then probably you would not win your case, because who trusts a woman? So it's very significant that Luke is going to emphasize women were the ones who first witnessed the empty grave and first came with the news to tell people. One of the interesting things that at the end of chapter 23, Luke 2 times says that these were the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee. So they've been following Jesus a long time. And when we get to the book of Acts next autumn, we'll look at the story of where, since Judas betrayed Jesus, and he's off the scene, and so they're needing to pick another person to kind of officially be the 12 because of that symbolic nature. And so when they're talking about, who can fill this role, one of the things they say, it's got to be someone who went in and out with us all the way from the baptism. Back back when we were up north, the beginning of Jesus' life. And I think one of the things Luke is probably doing here is saying that actually the women were qualified. There's some women who were qualified. Now, when they choose the next person, they say a man. So they're going to choose a man. And, that was maybe culturally necessary at the time that there will be a man who will officially fill those shoes. But I think Luke is trying to say, by the way, there were actually some women who were qualified, who were there and are going to bear witness. And in fact, one of the things you should notice here is that there is not an emphasis on the 11. First scene, it's women. Peter comes in very briefly. This scene, it's just this Cleopas and another follower. And it's not till the end that then the 11 and those with them. But constantly, Luke is going to emphasize it's not just the 11. There's a larger group of people, including women, who are included in the story. And that's very important to what Luke wants to communicate, and it's very important to us. Okay, to something I've said before, are we in this story? And the answer to Luke is yes. It's the 11 and those with them, Cleopas and another follower, and we are other followers of Jesus. We are in this story. This story is about us. This story is for us. This resurrection story is pointed to us, and there's a lesson for us. Well, I'm not on Easter morning going to preach a feminist sermon, so I'm not going to talk a lot more about the role of women here. Toms might throw stones at me if I did do that, so I won't do that this morning. But it's an important message, but not necessarily for this morning. But what is important is the range of characters, and the 11 apostles are not the primary characters in Luke chapter 24. They're not. It's just very, very interesting. So with these sets of characters then, let's look at these scenes kind of one by one fairly quickly and see what it is that Luke wants to emphasize when he talks about the resurrection. So scene one is in the morning. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, these women now come with the spices that they prepared, and they come to the tomb. And then when they get there, the stone is rolled away. And then when they look in or enter, the body is gone. I mean, they've come for the sake of the body, and the body is gone. And so they're going to be very, very perplexed. But it says while they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. And we know that these are angels. We know that partially because of the other Gospels identify these guys as angels. And later on in chapter 24, they're angels. And just how they're described and the fact that how the women react to them, we know that these are not just human characters. These are angels sent from God with a message to explain what's going on. So these men appear, and they say, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" I mean, that's a little bit sarcastic. I think it's, not being snide. I mean, it's kind of good-hearted, but it's almost like a serious joke. Why are you looking for Jesus here? This is a tomb. This is for dead people. Why did you expect to find a dead person here? But he's not here. He's risen. And remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. And then now it's sinking in. They remember those words. Oh yeah, Jesus said that, and they actually meant something. Because they probably heard a lot of things that Jesus said, and maybe sometimes they thought, well, that's a nice kind of religious thing. Like we often listen to teachers and like religious people, that's nice, that's a cute kind of saying, and we don't realize how important it is till later, and so now it kind of sinks in. Oh yeah, we should have known this is going to happen. And that's kind of what the angels are saying. He told you this is how it's going to be. And one of the things that this does here is that it vindicates Jesus. When Jesus was crucified on Friday, it might have seemed like, oh well, we thought he was a prophet, but he wasn't. We thought he might be the Messiah, but I guess not because he's dead. He must not be who he said he was, and God must not be on his side. Maybe God is rejecting this guy Jesus as well because he's dead. But he's alive, and that vindicates the words of Jesus. Oh yeah, what Jesus said about this came true, and maybe what Jesus said about everything else is true. If God raised him from the dead, then maybe this is a man we need to listen to above all others. This is really important. I mean, for all of us, and in terms of figuring out our life and what we're going to believe. If Jesus was raised from the dead, then we need to listen to him above all others, above all others. If there's anyone we're going to spend time investigating, we should investigate Jesus. If he was dead and was raised from the dead, then he's a man we need to reckon with. Now, if you saw on the kind of announcement for the sermon on the Facebook page, I called this one little word. And in each of these three scenes, this one little word is used, and it's found in the word must. It's just a little short Greek word, 3 letters. It might seem very insignificant, but it's actually a word that Luke uses a lot in his gospel, and he uses it kind of more than the other gospel writers do. It's one of Luke's ways of communicating the significance of what's going on. So he says, the Son of Man must be delivered. This is how it's supposed to happen. It was meant to happen this way. There shouldn't be any surprise. There's actually a plan and a purpose going on. The word is used very early on the lips of Jesus in Luke chapter 2. If you remember that story, when Jesus, as a 12-year-old boy, was in the temple, and he stayed behind, and his parents are kind of going completely bananas about where he is, and I've got to go back and find him. And son, what in the world were you doing? What are you doing to us? 12-year-old kid staying behind in Jerusalem. And Jesus says to his parents, 12-year-old boy to his parents, really? I mean, didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? I had to be here. And there Jesus, or Luke uses that Greek word for what Jesus was communicating. I have to be here, of course. What I'm doing is part of my plan. It's part of the plan. And I'm supposed to be here. I have to do this. This is why I'm even here. So of course I've got to be here. It has to happen this way. And so it sinks into these women, and they kind of become the first witnesses of what they've seen. And in the New Testament, the word witness is a word for both what you see and then for witnessing to what you have experienced. So you see or experience something, and then you communicate that in words, and you're a witness in the sense that you receive a message, but you're a witness in the sense that you're also giving the message. And so these women are the first witnesses of this. So they go back to the 11 and all the others, and they say what has happened. Peter here, we see him briefly. He just gets up, he goes to the tomb, he looks in and sees that it's empty, and he's wondering what's happening. And Luke doesn't tell us anything more about what happens to Peter at this point. He's just there, but he's not having any kind of interaction at the end of scene 1. Then scene 2 is a longer story, and this is found only in the Gospel of Luke, but it's a really fascinating story, and I think if there's almost any incident in the Gospels that I would like to kind of follow along and listen to, it's this next scene when Jesus is going to actually explain everything to these 2 disciples. But it says, now that same day, so again, it's all on Sunday. All these scenes are on Sunday. On that same day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, which is about 11 kilometers from Jerusalem. So that's a couple hours walk, maybe. And so that's where, I don't know if that's where they live or that's where they're planning to spend the night. But they're talking about everything that has happened. I mean, they've had this overwhelming experience. They too have been following Jesus, but now they've witnessed the crucifixion, and they're wondering, what in the world is going on. And so they're talking about this. And as they're talking, a guy comes up alongside of them, and if they were introverts like I am, they probably would have been, what are you doing here? That's kind of weird, keep 2 meters away, I don't want, because they didn't recognize it's Jesus. It's Jesus, but they were prevented from recognizing him. So this guy just joins them. It's like those uncomfortable plane rides when you hope your seatmate is going to keep quiet, but then they start this conversation. And again, I'm like, oh, please, just leave me alone. But very fortunately for these guys, they engaged Jesus. So he asked, what are you guys talking about? And they stop. And they're obviously looking downcast. That's the word there. And one of them, Cleopas, says, did you just arrive in Jerusalem and you don't know what has happened here? Because this crucifixion was a very public event, and there were crowds that were part of it. It probably wasn't just a typical crucifixion, but the whole city was in an uproar over this crucifixion. And don't you know what's happened in these last couple days? So he asked, what things? Well, about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, and he was powerful in word and deed. But our rulers, they handed him over and crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one. That's what we thought. And we heard his message, and we saw his miracles, and we thought and we hoped he was the guy that our hearts were longing for, that all of Israel was waiting for. We hoped he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. But he died. But it is the third day, and so they're kind of remembering that, oh yeah, that's right, Jesus said something about the third day, and so what's up with that? And then also some of the women came, and they amazed us, and they talked about this empty tomb. And so Jesus says, how foolish you are, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Again, we can read those words a number of different ways, and I don't think he's really being hypercritical or really saying, what a bunch of idiots you are. I think his heart is different here. This is just the human condition. But how foolish, how slow of heart you are to understand this. Because all the prophets have spoken about this. Did not Christ have to suffer? Again, that's that same little short Greek word. It had to be this way. Didn't he have to do this? It shouldn't be a surprise, and it shouldn't depress your heart so much. This was the way it was arranged. Didn't he have to suffer these things and enter into his glory? And so beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning him. And I think this is what I would most like to have just, been the fourth wheel, coming along and listening to this lesson where Jesus did this. This is what I try to do. I try to do what Jesus is doing, and I, often when I've preaching through Exodus and Isaiah, when we had those series, I'm very aware of, man, if Jesus could be doing this, it'd be a lot better than I can do. And I wish I could have heard this. But beginning from the beginning of Scripture and all the way through, he's showing how it all pointed to him. And he's not saying that everything was necessarily a direct prophecy about these events, but it was all preparing for God's plan of salvation. It was all pointing a particular direction. And it had to be this way. And the scriptures, what Jesus did and how the scriptures come together is more verification that his message was true. The scriptures, Jesus' miracles, and then the resurrection, you put it all together, and it's like, maybe he really is who he said he was. So they're walking along, and as they approach a village where they were going, Jesus acted like he was going to go further. And here's just one of the great things where these two guys really did the right thing. Because it looked like Jesus was going to go further, and they say, look, it's getting late. Evening is here. Why don't you stay here with us? And we've talked a lot about hospitality, the importance of hospitality, and who you eat with and who you invite in. How fortunate for these two, without knowing it was Jesus, that they invited Jesus. And they played the host at first, and they showed hospitality to Jesus. How fortunate they were that they did this. Nevertheless, then, Jesus shows hospitality to them. And while they're eating, Jesus breaks the bread and he blesses it. And then maybe they're thinking about the Lord's Supper. Maybe they're thinking about when Jesus fed the 5,000, where again, Jesus took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and performed that miracle. And if you remember that story, part of the point is that Jesus gives life like he makes bread. It's more than enough for everyone. In any case, as they see Jesus do this, breaking the bread, they realize, or their eyes, God allows them to see the truth, and they realize it's him. But right then he disappears. And they asked each other, weren't our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened scriptures to us? And so they get up and they go all the way back to Jerusalem. Again, that's a couple hours walk. It's already getting dark. By the time they got there, it was probably quite dark. And they go back and they tell, again, the 11 and those with them, it's true, the Lord is risen. And they find out that actually Peter not just went to the tomb, but somewhere in the day, Peter also met the risen Jesus. Luke doesn't describe it. Okay, again, because Peter is not the central character here, but it happened, and so the people back in Jerusalem, have had some experiences, and these two come back and they've had independent experiences. But then it says, while they were still talking about this, and that leads us to scene 3. Again, it's the same day, one event happening one after the other. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And so he suddenly appears, I'm assuming not by the opening of doors or whatever, but he just, appears, materializes in front of them, and as it would any of us, they're startled and frightened, and so some of them at least are thinking, this is some kind of a ghost. This is a spirit here, and it leads to fear more than anything else. But he says to them, guys, why are you troubled? Why do you have doubts? You don't have to have doubts anymore. Look at me. Here's my hands and my feet. It's actually me. This is the body that was crucified. Here it is. Here it is. It's that body that died. It's now alive. But it's that body. It's that Jesus. It's me. Touch me and see. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have. And this tells us something about the resurrection and what's in future for us. Our eternal future is not some spirit, on a cloud playing harps. We're going to have a body again, better than this body. We won't be wearing masks that day. We won't have to worry about social distancing that day. But we're going to have bodies, and all the things we can't do now, we're going to be able to do. This is what one of the things Jesus' resurrection tells us about what a resurrection is like. But it's a body. He's not just a spirit. It's not a Greek future. It's a Hebrew future of God's good creation, physical creation. So again, he shows them his hands and feet. And they still didn't quite believe, but it's because of joy and amazement. So they're getting it, but it's still weird to them. They're happy about it, but it's like they're too happy to believe. This is too good to be true kind of experience for them. So he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Again, eating the food, it's a real body that can really eat. A spirit doesn't eat. He's eating real food, and they see it, and they smell it. And I imagine from here on, when they would smell broiled fish, they would think, oh yeah, I remember seeing Jesus eat this. So he says to them, "This is what I told you when I was still with you." Okay, remember, everything must be fulfilled. Again, that's that one little word. Everything must be fulfilled. This must happen. It was the plan, and it's got to happen this way. I told you this, okay? Remember, It's all written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. The entire Old Testament is full of pointers and is preparing the way for for my coming and everything that you've seen the last 3 years, and now it's all there. So he opens their minds so they could understand the Scriptures. And he told them, this is what is written. The Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. Like we talked about, or if you listen to the Good Friday message that was recorded, suffering is part of the story. It's the necessary part of the story. If Jesus was going to save others, he could not save himself. Okay, if he was going to be a Savior, he had to die. Suffering is necessary. Yeah, you can't, I hate to use a cliche, but, no gain without pain. It's really the way of life. And it had to be this way. If he's going to be a Savior of sinful people, it had to be this way. It's written, Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. Once again, this vindicates who Jesus is. His death did not negate everything that he said. His death and resurrection, rather, vindicates what he said and who he is. So far, all three scenes have the same basic message. It had to be this way, that he was going to suffer, but also he's going to be raised from the dead. And so there shouldn't be the surprise on Sunday morning. Of course, there is, and there was, and there would be for us, because it's, people don't rise from the dead all the time. It is a miracle. It is surprising, but he said it was going to happen. And if they trusted Jesus, they could have trusted this event. And it happened just that way. And it had to happen this way. So all three scenes have the same basic message. It was a plan, it was written down, and Jesus predicted it, and it happened exactly like it was meant to happen. But Jesus doesn't stop there, and here's where we get to the significance of who is there and who is in these scenes. And it's not just the 11. It's the women. It's Cleopas and the other follower. It's not just the 11, but it's this larger group of people who are there, who've been following Jesus. And they're gathered there, and these words are for them. And I think in what Luke is doing here, these other people represent us. It's our way of reading ourselves into this story, where we fit. Okay, because Luke is writing this gospel to a particular person who's trying to figure out his life. How do I fit into this story? Do I fit into this story about Jesus? Theophilus, and we haven't really talked about the introduction, is probably a Roman official, and he's wondering, is this story for me? Do I fit? What am I supposed to do about this? And Luke is trying to say, here's how you fit. You are here represented by these people. And this must, that it must be fulfilled, isn't just about this message, but what Jesus says next is also included in how it necessarily has to happen. So Jesus says, this is what is written. The Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. And repentance and forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And who's going to do this preaching? Oh, you are witnesses of these things. That's who. You guys who've experienced Jesus, you've got to tell that story. You've got to witness about what you have witnessed. For a lot of these guys, it's not going to necessarily be public preaching like Paul or Peter, who would stand up, in a marketplace or whatever and raise their voices to a mass of people. Most of them aren't going to bear witness that way, but they're going to witness. It's part of the plan. It's part of what must happen, that you're going to be witnesses of this. Again, not just you've seen it, but you've got to talk about it. And I'm going to send you what my Father has promised. That is the Holy Spirit. And this is going to be part of the segue into the book of Acts. Okay, this event is not going to be described in the Gospel of Luke. It's a part of the story that's not fulfilled in the Gospel of Luke. It's only fulfilled in the next book that we have to get to. But Jesus has already said a similar thing. Another time when this little Greek word was on the lips of Jesus was in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus is going around from village to village, and different villages want to keep him there. But he says, I must preach. I have to do it. I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns as well. Because this is why I was sent. I was sent to spread this word as widely as possible. So I must move on so that more and more people can hear this message. So once again, we're reminded that the resurrection is a vindication of who Jesus is and what his message is. We ought to trust his word. We ought to take the time to examine his word. Nothing caught Jesus by surprise. Okay, this is really significant. Nothing caught him by surprise. Nothing can catch him by surprise. Nothing that happens to us, surprises Jesus at this point in time. Whatever we've experienced, like in the last year with COVID, it might be a surprise to us and difficult for us, but it didn't surprise Jesus. And he knew these days were coming. And he knew what the good things that could happen in these days. Okay? And of course, one of the reasons it's okay, even though it's been hard and I can't wait till more people can be here, we can have the Lord's Supper when it's not so awkward with distance, it's okay. Okay, because he's present with us. The way the Gospel of Matthew has it, when he gives this commission to his disciples, he says, oh, by the way, I'm sending you, but I'm with you all the time. To the end of the age, I'm with you. So he's been with us and unsurprised by our experience in the last year, and he will be with us. And nothing is going to catch him by surprise. Nothing that happened to Jesus caught him by surprise. He wasn't surprised by Judas. He wasn't surprised by Peter's denial. He knew ahead of time and still invited them to the table. He wasn't surprised about any of those events. He walked toward it. He knew it was coming. It was part of the plan. So here's kind of the big picture of the resurrection story in Luke 24. There's a plan and a pattern. The fact that it could be talked about in the Old Testament before it happened means that there was a plan. God had a plan about how he was going to fix everything that was broken. And he never deviated from that plan. And there's a pattern in which he was doing things, and part of that pattern included suffering, so that's why it's really not surprising that the Messiah would suffer. Okay, because his servants often suffer, to bring the plan to fruition. So there's a plan and a pattern that we can understand and we can join into and maybe be a little bit less surprised about some of the things that we experience. But God's plan always involves the people. And I've said this repeatedly. When God does something, 99% of the time, he's going to do it through people. Not just on his own from heaven, but he's going to do it through people. So when he was going to send a Messiah, there was a Messiah he sent. It was his son, but he sent a person. He sent his son as a person, and he always works through people. And so right here we have this group of people who are in this upper room. And they're necessary for the plan, because this is how God always does it. It's part of his pattern that there's going to be a people. And these people are going to have a purpose. And this is part of the good news, that we can have a life with purpose. People who live without a purpose might have fun sometimes, but don't have joy, aren't necessarily satisfied with their life. It's people who have a purpose who generally succeed in life. It's a people with a purpose. A communitas, by the way, that's what a communitas is. A community with a purpose, a community with a mission, a people with a purpose. But not just a purpose, but a presence. He's not leaving us. We're not running off to do this all on our own, but He is with us. He's going to be with us. He's going to send the Spirit, and the Spirit is going to be with us. We will never be separated from the presence of Jesus. He's with us. He's present here. I mean, I don't, maybe some of you actually this moment are experiencing His presence. I'm not experiencing His presence, but He's present. He's here. He's here. Yeah, He's present. This is good news. They're going to have to go, and they're not going to have an easy life. They're going to be living out this pattern of Jesus. It's going to include some sacrifice and suffering, and some of them are going to be crucified too. Okay, but they're not going to do it alone. They've got a mission, but it's Jesus' mission, and because it's Jesus' mission that they are on, He's going to be with them. He's going to be with them. So this is kind of, in a sense, the Bible. There's a plan and a pattern, and you can see it from chapter 1 all the way to the last chapter. There's going to be a people with a purpose, with the presence of God. So I just want you to reflect especially on the presence of Jesus. And as we come to the Lord's Supper in a moment and think about the bread and the wine, I want to especially think about the presence of Jesus with us and what that means. Before we get to that, Giannis is going to come up and we're going to do one more song.